Today is, oh, this is not correct.
Monday the 12th.
Yeah, it says Wednesday, the 12th. Are you good, Karen? Okay, today is Monday, July 12th, and the school committee will begin our meeting at 5:35 PM. We will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We have a couple members who are coming in remotely tonight, so I'll apologize in advance if we have any technical difficulties. Agenda item number 2 is the school committee member introductions. We'll start with Ms. Paquette.
Karen Paquette, Assistant Superintendent.
Bruce Damon, Ward 1.
Janet Bowden, Ward 2.
Kiernan Majerus Collins, Ward 3.
Jake Langlis, Superintendent.
Megan Parks at large.
Linnea Hawkins, Ward 5.
Ron Podvin, Ward 6.
Paul Beauplant, Ward 7.
Alicia Ray, City Council Representative.
Thank you, everyone. Agenda item number 3 is the consent agenda. Are there any items that members would like set aside? Seeing none, the consent agenda is adopted. Agenda item number 4 is public input. Members of the public may address the school committee for up to 3 minutes on non-agenda items now or on agenda items later. Comments that pertain to staff, personal matters, or a student issue should be directed to the superintendent or the appropriate staff member of Lewiston Public Schools. Public comments shall be directed to the school committee and be brief, not repetitive, and related to the matter at hand. Before starting, please state your name, address, and/or affiliation with Lewiston Public Schools. Are there any members of the public that would like to speak? Are there any attendees that would like to speak? Seeing none, we will move on to agenda item number 5 to receive and approve the update regarding the governor's budget adjustment. Superintendent Langlis.
So I was looking for Sue. Yeah, this does have. So good evening, everyone. In the news recently, the governor has shifted some funds at the state level to make the appropriations at 55% statewide. And as that has continued to move forward, we're looking at projections and what number that might end up being for Lewiston Public Schools. You can see in the memo I shared in the packet that we are anticipating approximately $1.5 million, which in our budget that was significantly reduced with some of the efforts that we had put forth being moved to either off the table or into relief funds, which have a sunset in a couple of years. Wanted to bring some new information to you and propose addressing some concerns that we have as this funding coming after the referendum. It's allowable to be spent, and there are provisions built into the language of the governor's orders around this 55% that prescribe that. So if this all comes through as we anticipate, what we're looking to do with the committee's approval is to add to our curriculum department to make that a more robust outfit and be able to support people as we have talked about over time. Earlier in the year, Assistant Superintendent Paquette presented to the curriculum committee and also to this group and through the budget process, the various needs that are really sorely lacking for us as a school system. The capacity that we need to support people appropriately. We have teachers and others asking for support, asking for training, asking for coordination. And so one of the ways that we can do that is to grow the capacity there. And Karen, do you want to share just a couple of things around what we're looking to do?
Certainly. So when I presented back this spring, I shared with you my 5-year plan that I had also shared with the Finance Committee and the work of the Curriculum Committee as well. And in the process of the budget process, we were able to support one of those instructional specialists out of the 3 that I had asked for. And we moved one of those to the ESER funds, which would only allow for that position to be a 2-year position. So what we're looking to do with these funds, and based on Superintendent Langlis's memo, we're looking to bring on a senior director of teaching and learning, which essentially would be the previous 2 roles that I was in, the chief academic officer, as well as the literacy director and math director. So kind of combining those 2 positions to help support the work that's happening around teaching and learning, and then bring that other position that was moved to ESER funds into local funds, as well as adding that third position that was actually never made the first round, if you will, of the budget. These positions would support the work of the Curriculum Committee and the focus, as Member Collins had mentioned, around the early reading and supporting getting our students reading at grade level, as well as supporting our instructional coaches and the curriculum development that's needed to move the district forward.
I'd add that in addition to that request, we'd like to bring things that were put in ESERF that were strongly supported by this committee, books, periodicals, and instructional supplies with any remaining dollars, and bringing that back in, again, helping peel back some of that cliff that will exist with relief funding and with budget cycles. I also want to add that when I came on board, just a few days from now, it'll be a year. One of the things that we had talked about was getting back to an educational organizational structure where we had an assistant superintendent and did that work. And Karen is amazing to work with, but we never hired her prior position. And so that still sits. So she continues to do that work and the new ask of being an assistant superintendent. And during the pandemic, I think we were able to keep things afloat. But if we're really going to accelerate and do the work we want to do, we need capacity there. So that was the ask before you. Answer any questions you may have.
Ms. Ray.
Thank you, Chair Parks. So I have 2 questions, and I apologize if it's in here, but can you just refresh us again? How is it possible that in receiving additional state funding, that it doesn't just go towards reducing the property tax burden, since we already had a referendum on expenditures?
Yeah, I had to do a little research on that myself. So there's language at the state level with this effort to get to 55% that is specific to the money being able to be used, because many municipalities obviously are beyond the referendum for the local share. So what this does is it actually reduces the local share on paper, if you will. So because it's already been approved and it's at that state minimum local share amount that was put in the ED 279. It's allowable expense moving forward. But I had to research, and I reached out to colleagues to check on that, because there's been situations in the past where there was an adjustment late and it led to what was called emergency spending only, which the school committee has purview over. And so all the language I've seen is that this committee is the deciding factor on how these funds get used. And there was no direct connection to this had to go back to the city.
And if I could just continue on one more point. So I'm in support of this, of course, but I think one thing we talked about with the ESER funding was to pull back special education summer activities into the general fund before we moved one-time expenses such as instructional supplies back. Could you explain the reasoning? Because here it seems like the supplies are being put ahead of that.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that we've continued to hear from our staff is they wanted more materials for the classroom. So that was one line of thinking. I'm not opposed to funding special education or summer school in general, especially with the remediation efforts. We have been able to put those in ESER funds. So we've bought some time there. And we're also looking at exploring how we use title funds and things more effectively moving forward to be able to bring those back in. However, I think an argument could be made instantaneously to move that back as much as possible over, say, books and periodicals or supplies.
I would be more in favor of that rather than the supplies, just in order of priority, but I also trust administration to make the right choice there.
Member Bulpelon.
Has the job description been prepared for the Director of Teaching and Learning position?
It is not. There is a job description for the Chief Academic Officer, which is the role that I held prior. And we've not done any tweaking to that. It would be pretty close to that job description with a change in name and a few responsibilities.
Okay, I bring that up because being across the river in my job, I worked closely with Shelley Mogul, who is the Director of Teaching and Learning there. And if we need to see a variety of things, it might be great to consult her, and I'm sure she'd be very receptive to sharing her points of view. Thank you.
Member Majerus Collins.
Thanks. I want to start by recognizing the fact that the governor and the legislature have finally done this and finally made the kind of investment in public education that the state deserves and that Lewiston desperately needs. And so I think that it's worth reflecting on the fact that we're finally getting this after so very long after the people of Maine voted for it. But primarily, I wanted to say that the superintendent's plan seems correct to me. To Member Ray's point about instructional supplies versus summer education expenses, especially summer education expenses for special education students. My understanding from the budget process was that those instructional supplies and materials were also recurring expenses, and that there was a baseline amount of money that we needed to spend every year to make sure that folks in our district had what they needed. And we had budgeted for less than that. As long as the money is principally being used, in addition to supporting what Assistant Superintendent Paquette talked about. But beyond that, as long as the money is being used to take recurring expenses out of relief funds and put them into our general budget, that strikes me as the best approach. And given that at the end of this 2-year cycle that we have planned out, all of those recurring expenses that are in relief have to be back in the general budget, the order in which we do them is not particularly significant to me.
Thank you. Any other comments? Member Potvin.
So Jake, refresh my memory. I thought in our budget process that we did put Karen's position in to be hired. So her position is not part of the budget, which was just passed?
The position that she used to hold was not in this current budget.
Not,
That was something that we did, were able to come to find through our vetting things line by line. So
okay.
we did think it appropriate to bring to you, even though it's in personnel policy. There's not money sitting there for it, which is
Okay.
prompting this.
Okay, the second piece is, it's been a long time, but I remember voting on LD1 and the decision to fund education at 55%. And a large portion of that narrative was to direct tax relief to the taxpayers, that the state was going to be covering a bigger chunk. And given the fact that we just got, you're saying we're going to get the additional 1.5, or it's planned that we're going to get the 1.5 this year. And we've gone to the taxpayers and asked them for the 400, whatever thousand it was beyond the requirement. Are we not in the position where we could choose to relieve that 400,000 additional requirement with this additional 1.5 million?
I'd have to do additional research on that. really what I went and looked at was the language provided to us by the Department of Education by way of the governor's message. And there's language in there that is specific to these very questions. I don't think I could sit here and say with certainty that it couldn't be used in that way. But to me, this was the first time that it said explicitly that it could be used this way, which must have taken some effort. There's also, if this carries forward, which is the intent, I believe, from Augusta, that this will have a direct reduction to the taxpayer. Or if the tax base remains relatively the same, it does have an increase for school funding.
Right, on the mill rate
Correct.
for next year.
Mhm.
I was just saying, as a taxpayer looking at this now and reading that school budget's getting 1.5 million more, and we've asked them for more, albeit we got a reduction on the additional valuation and so forth. Still, I mean, these are opportunities, and I view it as opportunities of compromise, that yes, we have stuff to take care of in the school side, but at the same time, this whole law was genuinely adopted to provide this relief that we just got. So I would, would want to at least have that discussion. And, I do agree to a point with Member Collins about the stuff that we use the COVID funding for, that's going to run out in 2 years. However, we still have that for 2 years. So, there's a part of me that wants to take some advantage of what's appropriate to use that money for. And to address, not only Karen's position, but the other positions that we've talked about, but didn't happen this year. So I guess a mishmash of all three.
One approach for this evening, if anyone wants to make a motion, could be to approve the curriculum pieces and then see what else is out there for language and opportunity and bring that back to the committee.
And make that motion.
I'm ping ponging now. Kieran's hand was up, but that was prior to you guys making the motion. So I don't know if he wants to still comment or if he's trying to comment on something previous.
I was trying to make a motion.
Okay.
So I guess I'll offer it as an amendment. I would move to amend the motion and adopt the superintendent's recommendations as presented. And I guess if there's a second for that, we can see, and then I can comment about why I think we should do that.
Is there a second? Seconded by Member Beauplant. Go ahead.
So I appreciate all the work that the superintendent has done on this, and I think that we should move forward and make the investments that we can make now. I would point out to Member Potvin's point about tax rates, that the voters of the city of Lewiston gave this budget as presented back in May a considerable mandate. Nearly 60% of the people who voted in the referendum backed it. And then the city delivered a further tax cut with the CMP windfall. And so the idea that that extra education money should be funneled more this year into a tax cut when the voters already approved the budget and then they got a tax cut they didn't expect, to have then a second tax cut as opposed to fully investing in our kids and in our schools, strikes me as not the right way to go. And I think honestly, as long as we are in a situation where we have recurring funds in non-recurring revenues, which we do with the relief funds, until that has been sorted, it's irresponsible to continue to pass along, extra tax dollars, as opposed to trying to stabilize ourselves and put ourselves in a position where we can consistently support the budget that we all voted for.
Thank you. Ms. Ray.
I can definitely abide by that. I think the part that I'm super hung up on is how this confirms with state law when state law says that we have to go to referendum for expenditures, but I believe the superintendent when he says he did his work. And so I can get on board with the reminder that, there was a clear majority, even though it was a small turnout for the referendum. There was a majority of folks who went along with this, and then the city delivered. And I apologize, I was not at the last meeting. So just to add some context to the way the city delivered that tax relief based on the valuation, the city council could have just used those funds and had a supplemental appropriation for the city side of things, and chose not to because the school department would have had to go back to referendum. And so my understanding is that's why staff and leadership decided to deliver the property tax relief outcome rather than go back and redo all the budget work that we've done before. So I feel like knowing that happened, that relief has been passed on to both residents and business owners. We have the referendum vote in hand, and we have more money on top of that. I feel more comfortable with the plan being outlaid as the superintendent has prescribed it.
Member Potvin.
Jake, do we get numbers? I mean, what's the visual that we're actually voting on here? I mean, is it just clearly 1.5 million to curriculum and?
The numbers would be, the cost of those salaries and benefits for those positions. And then because they could be hired in different ranges according to the personnel policy, we would go from there with what we could expend in other areas.
I mean, I would remind the committee that, as the public voted on this budget, they were not voting on these particular pieces that the superintendent's presenting tonight. That wasn't there in the budget. And this 1.5 million provides an opportunity for that to happen, while at the same time, taxpayers are going to be asking, okay, why not the opportunity to take care of that added additional spending on the tax rate? So, it works both ways. And I get it that the public voted for it, but there's a little piece of disingenuity here that, the state comes in after the fact, and we got money that we're able to spend on this year's budget. And we're just going to go and spend it. And we're already, again, I'm going to beat the drum again. We're already significantly staring at holes in cliffs of the fund balance and what we're using for COVID. To take this 1.5 and add more expenditure that is going to need to be supported next year is, to me, just it's worrisome. And the fact we don't have actual numbers. I mean, I think there's the red flags here all over the place, and we should maybe take a deeper look. And I would prefer to sort of have the opportunity to hammer this out in the finance committee of what would be an appropriate number to move forward with, and get an idea, is it reasonable to maybe return some tax dollars and still be able to do a significant amount of, increases without putting us even further that much more along the cliff. This 1.5 million, we need to depend upon next year to fill that cliff that we're depending on fund balances for. So I'm very, very leery about automatically just using this 1.5 to increase in other positions and stuff. So that's my thought.
Any other, Ms. Ray?
I think one thing that might be helpful to place into context is the hiring cycle for positions like this. Is summer the time? I imagine for most positions, given the academic year and cycle, that summer would be the time to get the best candidates for this. Is that true, or am I making that up?
I think both from a talent pool perspective and also to get this work going sooner is better for us.
Okay, I think that's helpful. I respect Member Popfin's thought that this should go before finance, but I think we heard a lot about it during the budget cycle. Now's the prime opportunity, and I think LPS is ready to get back to well, continue the good work that they're doing through this. So I'll be voting in favor of the amendment by substitution.
Member Beaumont.
I want to echo Ms. Ray's comments. I think we all remember the budget deliberations we went through. We had to make some serious cuts. We never presented what I'd call a wish list. And the cuts were painful. This 55% that has been promised for so long should not be viewed as a windfall. It should be spent judiciously, but I really feel that, again, the administration of an effective teaching and learning, as I've seen, is very supportive of so many teachers and students that I would support it, although I certainly recognize Member Potvin's concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Majoris Collins.
I have great respect for Member Potvin, even though we don't share the same views on everything. But I think on this issue, he's trying to have it both ways. If the concern is about a fiscal cliff and an impending gap between the expiration of relief funds and continuous sustaining expenditures that our students and staff rely on, then it's all the more important that this money be allocated primarily, as the superintendent has directed, or rather proposed, to reducing that gap. And if, on the other hand, the desire is to deliver a tax cut, then it's hard to hear about the concerns about the fiscal cliff. We can do one of those two things, but we can't do both. And so I would encourage folks to keep the fiscal cliff in mind, to keep responsible and sustainable budgeting in mind, and to support the amendment.
Member Potvin.
Clarification, Jake, on your proposal. I know the curriculum piece is there. In your proposal, are you already addressing issues to move, as Member Collins has suggested, of those items in COVID funding into the regular budget and take that off of the, what I'll call the COVID funding cliff? And or are we not there yet, or you need more work on this? I just want to get a clear idea where we are with the finances.
So there's a few pieces, and I don't know if Assistant Superintendent Puckett can pull some of her initial proposals for those positions and what they would likely cost. I know that she has that somewhere, but maybe not at her fingertips. We don't know the actual amount that we'll receive. And then so the other pieces that we were looking at doing, were to reduce or bring back in those recurring costs. And so a couple of things that I've heard in listening just now, we do have those seemingly less recurring costs, like textbooks. Those cycle, they last longer than a year, but there's a cycle to them being replenished. There are some things that we're looking specifically to use the relief funds for that are one time or not for a long time, wherever we can. So we would want to pull things back from ESERF that were more of the recurring. So it's not a sticker shock next spring. And we don't have that final number yet, but we do have time in those other areas to see how it develops, know exactly what we do have, and then itemize the things that we might want to move back.
Any further discussion? Ms. Paquette.
I can share for the instructional specialist positions, which one is currently in ESERF. So it would be a 2-year position. Salary is around 80,000, and then you add on benefits. So let's say 95. So that would be moving from ESERF into the local funds with that. If that would be the same number, if we were to add the additional specialists that never made the ESERF or the local budget, that was in my 5-year plan that I proposed. And then in terms of the senior director, that would be on the personnel policy, and that would be based on my previous role. That would be somewhere between an SME 20 and an SME 21. Which is about 100,000 and then include benefits as well. So another 115,000 for the positions.
Further discussion before we vote? Okay, all votes tonight will start with Ward 2. Oh, hang on a second. Yes, hang on 1 minute. Yes, we're voting on the amended motion.
Which is to adopt the memo as presented.
Point of order, I think we're voting on the amendment and then we'd have to take a second vote on the motion regardless of whether the amendment is successful or not.
Right.
Yep.
So we're currently voting on to accept it as Jake presented. Ward 2.
I'm gonna go ahead and trust Jake on this and I'll vote yes.
Ward 3.
Yes.
Ward 5.
Yes.
6.
No.
7.
Yes.
City Council.
Yes.
Yes. Ward 1. Can you turn your mic on, please? Sorry.
No.
The amendment moves forward.
Do you want to mic that?
So the amendment moves forward with a vote of 6-2. All right. 1, 2, 3.
Yes. Okay, and then now we have to vote on the original motion regardless. Ward 2.
Yes.
Ward 3.
Yes.
5.
Yes.
6.
No.
7.
Yes.
City Council.
Yes.
Yes. Ward 1.
No.
Thank you.
Motion passes 6-2.
So we're good with all that. Okay. Agenda item number 6, to receive and approve the first reading of policy JICA dress code. Ms. Ray and Mr. Langlis will present.
Yeah, so I wanted to kind of kick things off. Member Ray has been our subcommittee chair for policy, and a lot of work has happened behind the scenes, and I thank her for that. And I believe she's going to go up and share her screen. As she makes her way, the first policy we have before us tonight is the dress code. And I want to express some reservations that I have. In the past, dress code conversations have had a good amount of vetting with students, with staff, with families. And while we have this before you, because it came up at the end of the year from middle school students, which I thought was a good job of us hearing from them and their voice and their efforts, I do feel like this could warrant some work once the school gets back in session, once schools get back in session. So if any parties are interested, I just want to make sure I was real clear and upfront that I'm not heavily opposed to this language. I don't know if it's the right language. I'd like to vet it some more, potentially. And if this was something that were tabled, I would make an effort with our district leadership to make sure that we have a vetting process for this to get input. And I would say if it moves forward tonight as a first read, I'm having an open session just for public input next Monday. If any members of the public want to provide info or input on this prior to our second read, just as an opportunity to hear voices. So.
Thanks for that, Jake. Just starting off with this first one, I just wanted to add some context similar to what Superintendent Langlis just did. So we weren't planning on touching dress code policy. It wasn't in our queue of things that we were going to address over the next couple months. However, the middle school students and the advisory with Mr. Perkinson and Ms. DeBlah, I think, came forward, spoke with 2 members of the policy subcommittee, myself and former member Physic. They spoke with superintendent about their feelings about this policy. And so we ended up taking a look and also referencing our main school board association notes. We had a policy review done by them way too long ago, 18 months now, and we're still working to implement those changes. They noticed in our policy that we had a lot of outdated language. And so we took a look at other school districts to see if there was a better format for this. To the superintendent's point, this is a first go, a first read tonight. And so I'll bring up the language that we're referring to. This was in your packet as a tracked and a clean copy, as we do with all our policies. And totally open to feedback on it. It removes mention of things like genitalia, and it removes mention of, oh, sorry, I don't know how this computer works clearly. There we go, of specific headwear. What it does replace it with is very open for interpretation. And so we absolutely welcome feedback here tonight and as well as next Monday night during that open forum to see if we can arrive at something that is more representative, that allows students to be comfortable in their dress, but also be able to learn in their environment. So open to thoughts, questions, feelings, concerns.
Any questions or comments? Member Potvin?
Jake or Alicia, what brought this before us was a middle school request or study? Is that right?
There was a group of middle school students that had been prompted by an interest in this. They tied into some curriculum work. They did some surveys. They talked to some people that they had contact with. But again, in that hybrid setting, remote pandemic structure. So I think there's room for more vetting.
So was there discussion with the high school level and with grammar school level?
No.
Was there discussion on multiple teacher levels or just the middle school?
If they went outside of just the middle school, it was limited in scope. It wasn't comprehensive.
And how extensive was the parent involvement in this?
I believe some parents of the students had chimed in as connected to some of their curriculum work, but I don't think it went beyond that.
And you're saying you have some concerns of the fact that not the entire school system has weighed in on this, and this wouldn't apply just to the middle school. This is going to apply to every grade, correct?
As written, it would be district-wide.
Yeah. So
I would just add to that, that the issue that came to us from the middle school and the surveying that the middle school students and their advisory did surrounded specifically hats and hoods policy, which is a portion of the original policy JICA. This is, again, and this does not say that they should wear hats and hoods. It just moves towards placing the responsibility in the hands of individual students and families. There are health and safety exceptions in here. It talks about substantial disruptions or material disruptions to the learning process, but it allows students to express themselves in ways that they prefer. I think we've added as much safety as we can to this, but if this is not the direction that folks want to go in, I understand it. It's mostly a timing thing for getting this out too right now. You know, teachers aren't available. They've done their 100 or their contract days. You know, administrators, some have weighed in on this, not all. So if this needs to go towards tabling, that's totally fine. But I think as it stands, the policy is general. I think administrators can use their discretion here and that families can make choices.
I think it's important to note that the last time this policy was looked at and revised and accepted by the school committee was in, I believe, 2015. And it was a high school student leading a team of other high school students who brought the revisions to the school committee. And so this isn't uncommon that something like this would come from the student level. They're the ones that are most impacted by it. So I think their voice is really important. With that said, I would be okay with tabling it or moving it till we got some more input, only because I believe if we eliminate a lot of that language, it's too vague. And if a policy is too vague, I think it's open to a lot of different interpretations. And then we would end up with some problems of one teacher who's enforcing it in a way different from another teacher. So I think having some parameters, maybe not as restrictive as it's been, but having some parameters spelled out could be helpful. Member Bowden.
Hi, thank you. So I just, when I originally heard the discussion from the middle schoolers about hats and hoodies, I turned to my own children and asked them what they thought about it. Was that kind of a big deal? Is that something that they thought would be bothersome? And they were sort of like, Mom, like no one cares. So I kind of like went into it with that attitude, like, well, if that's what a kid wants to wear, it's what a kid wants to wear. And then in our last meeting, we had, which forgive me, but I think it was a former teacher come up and kind of give a demonstration wearing a hat and hoodie and made some pretty valid points. And it kind of changed my mind again. So I would probably agree with Megan on this one, that we should table this and do a little more extensive research and reach out to different schools before we completely cut out this language. I also think, I don't think it's a horrible idea to leave it to a classroom teacher's discretion. Like if there's a teacher that just does not want hats and hoodies in their classroom, they should have the say. But I understand too if it needs to be a district-wide rule, but I just think that we should table it and discuss this further.
Thank you, Member Beaupont.
Thank you. I think more stakeholders should be involved in making this decision on policy. And again, going back to my experience in the classroom, I allowed hats and hoodies. I did not have any problems. If I did have a problem, I'd go up one-to-one with an unsarcastic and non-public way of, would you please take off your hat? I can't see your eyes. I can't see your face. Very rarely, count on one half of one hand the time I had to get an administrator involved. So I would probably lean toward it, but I would like more input on it from others. Thank you.
Ms. Hawkins.
I agree very much with Mr. Beauplant and with what Chairperson Parks has said concerning getting more input. When we had the discussion about the hats and hoodies, it was interesting to me because I grew up at a place different but similar to Maine in Alaska. We wore hats and hoodies and there was never an issue. If a teacher wanted us to take our hat off, they would say so. I wore a hat through the entirety of my high school years because I was hiding from everybody and it was never an issue. But then again, that's a vastly different time. Graduated in 98. So things are very different now than they were then. Also on that note, my son, who is now 20, refused to wear a winter coat, but would wear 2 hoodies to school and never had an issue. So I think it's something we need more input on. And we definitely need to hear from parents as well as other teachers, besides the nice person who came in and testified to us before, of their opinion as well.
Thank you. Member Majerus Collins.
So I would start by making a motion to approve the first read, which would give this the opportunity to move forward and solicit further public feedback and give members the chance to think about it more. But in recognition of the work that's been done and in recognition of the process that we have, moving it forward on a first read strikes me as the right approach. So I guess I can wait for a second, and then if that goes, I can talk about why.
I'll second that.
Okay. So, you know, I don't think there's anything wrong with someone wearing a hat unless it's a Yankees hat. And so, you know, in all seriousness, we had students come before us and ask something through their teachers. This has been an issue that has been in the public eye for, I think we're about a month into this now. Any final vote on this would be at least 2 weeks away, potentially another month away. And I think that we ought to solidify this and have an answer prior to the start of school in the fall. I think that we're giving folks an ample opportunity to share their perspectives on it. And obviously, last week we had one older former LPS employee who had a very unique take on it. And then we also heard from a current LPS employee who was very supportive. And I think that Member Bowden may not be off in the sense that most folks don't really have a strong opinion. And so the need necessarily to go fishing for one strikes me as a little bit of a solution in search of a problem. Folks have the opportunity to weigh in. They had the opportunity to weigh in the last couple of weeks. They have the opportunity to weigh in this week. They have the opportunity to weigh in next week and the week after that. And so if there are people who are passionate about this, they will make their voices heard. The other thing I would point out is that the policy as written by Member Ray does not prescribe a district-wide policy on these questions. It takes the district out of the business of regulating students' headwear and clothing and puts that decision closer to where it actually belongs. And this means that building administrators have more flexibility to set rules as they see fit. Classroom teachers have an opportunity to set rules as they see fit. And then obviously students and families can largely make a lot of their own decisions about what they wear to school. And so I think that as we try to move towards a district that is more inclusive and more and out of the business of disciplining kids for petty Andy nonsense, that this is a move in the right direction that does not that actually gives administrators and teachers more freedom to decide what is and is not acceptable in their classrooms, rather than the district adopting a one-size-fits-all policy as we currently have.
Ms. Ray.
Thank you. I would agree, and I appreciate that Member Collins pointed out, Majerus Collins pointed out that the third clause under the proposed solution gives autonomy to the schools to talk about this. When we first heard this come up, the conversation that I had with the folks on the policy subcommittee meeting for that day was about, well, maybe this works for the middle school, maybe it doesn't work for the high school. I have never been an administrator in either of those places, so I defer to the experts on that. But I think this does prescribe that schools can set their own standards for this. We as local officials prefer local control because we know our city the best, our school system the best. I think the administrators know their schools the best, and so they can kind of help guide us there. I definitely want to hear the feedback, and I am currently hoping to make the superintendent's forum next Monday to hear those inputs. I've heard from 2 community members now on this, and I thank Ms. Parody for her patience on our call earlier today. I think this is the way to go. We are providing for the health and safety of our students, making sure they can learn. Those are the top 2 things. And then from there, it's about comfort so that they can focus on learning for me. I look forward to hearing if folks have suggestions for this language at this point, and also next Monday night.
If there's anything that I've learned in the policy review and equity work that we've been doing in this district for a while, is that if something isn't spelled out, it's only as equitable as the person that's enforcing it. And so having something that doesn't have any set parameters, or that isn't a little bit more specific on saying what is allowed versus what is not allowed, concerns me in that it allows for way too much variation in enforcement. And I think that is a concern that should be addressed.
Member Parks, could I ask for clarification on that? I feel like that's a great idea, but we have to put words on paper for the policies that exist. And so if you have a suggestion, I'd love to jot it down as we consider everything.
I think just not as simple as it is. I appreciate cutting down a lot of the stuff that was on there, but I think having some of that added back in that spells out this is allowed versus this is not allowed, I think it sets clearer parameters so that we're not having things change from one classroom to the next. Our students at the middle school and the high school don't spend, most of them are with a different teacher each period. And for having that fluctuation, if a student wears a hoodie first thing in the morning and they're okay in period 1, but then they go to period 2 and it's not okay, and then they have to take it off, then they go to period 3 and it is okay. I think that without having anything spelled out, I think that it's open to too much interpretation that could have sort of a counter effect from what we're trying to accomplish. So I don't have no specific language at the moment, but I just think having some more clearly defined language would be important, so it's not so open to interpretation. Member Potvin.
So, I mean, as we present this, I'm continuing to learn more and more and more as we go on. And it's getting cloudier and cloudier. And I just feel all of a sudden the discussion that, we'll be doing one thing at an elementary school while doing another thing at a middle school and another thing at a high school. I think that the district needs to weigh in on this. And I mean, Jake and your leadership with your team, with the administrators as a whole. I've heard a lot of choppiness to this, that some administrators don't care for it, others do. Teachers are, not really sure how they feel about it. It depends on how it turns out. Some parents aren't, some parents are, but they don't feel they've been heard. Even the kids, I mean, I had 2 kids come to me and they said, do you realize how intimidating that is to us in school when people dress like that? So they had concerns, and I don't think that I don't think we're at the point where we've gotten enough feedback from the public on this. There's just too much. It's too convoluted, and I'd like a little bit more research done. I don't think we're in a position to move this forward. So I'm going to make the motion to table this at this time.
Point of order. We have a motion pending.
Thank you.
Point of order, isn't tabling effective at any point during discussion? Yes.
I believe you can make it while there's a main motion on the table, but I'm probably wrong. You can table anytime. I know in other meetings, you can table anytime. Then it ends discussion. I think tabling takes precedent, but it has to have the 2/3 vote. Is anyone going to second the motion if we move forward with the motion? Yes,
Second the motion to table?
yes. Were you
I'll
making a
second that.
motion or were you asking a question?
No, I was asking, are we, I guess I just don't understand what the question is. Is it Ron's tabling?
Yes.
Then I'll second that.
It appears from a very quick reading that now is an appropriate time to make that motion. Member Majerus Collins, do you have a reference you want to send me to? If you would like this to not happen?
No, if the chair has ruled that it's a 2/3 vote required, and so we can move on with that.
Yes, it will be a 2/3 vote.
Any further discussion before we vote on tabling? Member Beauplan.
My support of the policy is superseded by my desire to have more people involved in the decision, so I will support the amendment to table. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Majerus Collins, your hand is still up. Do you?
Yes, it's up on purpose. I want to offer a couple of reasons to vote against tabling. The first of all,
Point of order, I'm pretty sure it's not tabled yet, but the motion to table is not debatable.
okay,
Usually,
so the chair has opened it up for debate, and we've heard one comment already.
Can you be brief, Member Majerus Collins?
Sure.
Thank you.
There's no date on this, so this is an indefinite table. And because of our 2-read policy, we're already giving the committee time and the public time to weigh in on this. And I think that if we slow this down anymore, we run the risk of not having a decision made by the beginning of school. I urge folks to vote no.
We do have the authority to waive the second reading. If this comes back to us for a first reading, say at our next meeting or the one after that, when we have more input, it's fully within our rights to waive the second reading and it would go into effect immediately at that time. Ward 2, voting on tabling the discussion.
I vote yes.
Ward 3,
No.
Ward 5,
Yes.
6,
Yes.
7,
Yes. Yes.
City Council. Oh, you guys have mics on still.
Wait, what's the question?
Voting to table.
No, don't do that.
I vote yes. Ward 1.
Yes.
Motion to table passes 6-2.
I don't know if member Beauplant's vote was on mic, so he did vote yes in favor of tabling it. I just wanted to make that on public record.
Yes.
Thank you. So now we were on agenda item number 7 to receive and approve the first reading of policy JIC, System-Wide Student Code of Conduct.
So I guess, yeah, I'm kind of punting here on this one, but Member Ray has very nicely laid out all of these potential shifts in a very clean document, so she can lead us through it.
Great, thank you. So I would advocate that we take a number of policies together here, those being policy ACAA, policy JIC. We're going to skip, go to policy JICH and policy JKE. I apologize. I had an outdated policy manual while I was updating JICK. If we take a break at any point during this meeting, I have amended that in the 2 minutes before this meeting and will email it to you all, but I will not break rules of corresponding during the meeting. So we'll have to take a break for that. All of these policies have taken a little change to them in accordance with the local resolution that we passed on March 15th, 2021. These policies have been updated to be a bit more explicit, there we go, to exclude elementary level students from possible expulsion as a disciplinary action. You'll also note in my memo that there are no policy changes recommended for policy EBCC for bomb threats or policy JICIA, weapons, violence, and school safety. Those two policies involve disciplinary action that's prescribed in state and federal law. So we can't touch those even with our policy in place locally. So again, I would recommend, if amenable to all, taking policy ACAA, JIC, JICH, JKE as a first read tonight. And I can pull up any of those examples if you'd like.
Member Majoris Collins.
I move that we adopt them all as first read.
There a second? Seconded by member Beauplant. Any discussion? Member Majoris Collins.
Just to point out that this committee already voted on the substance of this issue, and this is just Member Ray doing a lot of important cleanup work to make sure that our policy manual aligns with what this committee has already decided.
Thank you. Ward 2,
Yes.
Ward 3,
Yes.
Ward 5,
Yes.
6,
Yes.
Yes.
7,
Yes.
City Council.
Yes.
Yes. Ward 1.
Yes.
Thank you.
Motion passes 8-0.
That moves us to, they're all out of order now. I don't know which one is next.
So next we would be taking up policy AC, non-discrimination, equal opportunity, and affirmative action as a second read.
You can go ahead with that. Thank you.
Who's on first? So the first read of this policy occurred during the June 30th, 2021 meeting. It was passed, but there was an amendment needed to replace Gorham School Department with Lewiston Public Schools. Sometimes we borrow policy from our friends around the state, and that is good and encouraged, but we should refer to ourselves in those moments.
Thank you. Any discussion? Member Majoris Collins.
I move that we adopt with one change from what's presented, and that would be the addition of the words immigration status after national origin.
Can we get a paragraph that you're talking about?
Yeah, that's the second paragraph. So candidates for employment, students, others, activities on the premise of base of race, color, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, religion, ancestry, or national origin, immigration status, or disability.
I'll second the motion.
Any further discussion? Ward 2.
Yeah.
Ward 3.
Yes.
Ward 4. Sorry, Ward 5.
Yes.
6,
Yes.
7.
Yes.
City Council.
Yes.
Yes. Ward 1.
Yes.
Motion passes 8-0.
Next is policy ACA, anti-racism.
Already did that one. Next is policy JB.
Sorry, policy JB, transgender and gender expansive students.
Okay, so this one was, so the superintendent and I had a conversation about this one. So policy JB, transgender and gender expansive students, we have removed section C, part 2, due to its contradictory nature within the policy. I'm now going to pull it up so I know what I'm talking about. So formerly, we talked about in part 1 how we shall accept a student's assertion of their gender identity. But then in part 2, we then asked for proof of it. And so in a world where we know that there are some folks who are gender fluid, there are some folks who don't have access to healthcare because of their gender identities, or it's not recognized by their families or healthcare providers, things like that. We decided to take that portion out. I know there was also a discussion about consistent assertion of gender identity, and where we read into that, the conclusion that we came to in just a discussion between the superintendent and I, and so I hope you'll agree with this, is even if a student identifies as gender fluid, that is a consistent assertion of gender identity. And so we thought that was okay to leave in there. Obviously open to discussion tonight, but we did remove the contradictory portion of this policy.
My question on that, the use of the word consistent would be, can we add in language that defines that consistent assertion, consistent assertion of gender identity includes somebody who may have a varying identity? Just because the word consistent feels to me like it's contrary to somebody who's gender fluid to begin with.
Yeah, it's a quick response. We felt the same when we read through it, and that's what we have struck out of that. So that word consistent has actually been.
It's still in part 1.
It's still in part 1?
Yes.
Oh, I thought we pulled. Oh, the explanation of consistent in part 2 is what we pulled.
Correct. So what we can add in, can you see my screen? You can, that's great. So I'm just gonna go ahead and add in inclusive of gender fluid identities. Does that solve for X? I think so, yeah. Okay, perfect.
Oops, sorry, member Majerus Collins.
Oh, I was just going to suggest that we strike the word consistent, but we can also go with consistently inconsistent or the solution that was presented. Anyways, I would make a motion that we adopt this as presented. Is this a second read or a first read?
Second.
This is the second read. Okay, so then I would move that we adopt this and this will become school policy.
Is there a second?
I will second.
Thank you. Further discussion? Member Beauplant?
You have a definition of gender fluid.
Is that defined in previous policy or in our definitions section?
We have gender expansive, but not gender fluid. Perhaps we should change what I just added in to gender expansive.
Or we could just take out the word consistent
Consistent.
and maybe that would solve it all.
Yes, I think you're probably accurate there. Whereas there is assertion. They say it and it's true.
Assertion of their gender identity when there is assertion of a gender identity. That seems really oddly worded when you read it as a whole.
Yes, it's ugly, but it gets the job done. Lewiston Public Schools shall accept a student's assertion of their gender identity when there is assertion. Yeah, we got to take that out. Okay, hold please. I'm going to wordsmith.
I
Is there a
might see-
state, sorry, is there a state recommended definition for? The other definitions came from the state recommended document, correct? But they don't have gender fluid on that?
Member Ray, maybe you just want to strike everything from when to the end of the sentence. Lewiston Public Schools shall accept a student's assertion of their gender identity, period, end of sentence.
I believe in that. Does the person who seconded, Ms. Hawkins or Member Hawkins, sorry.
Yes.
It's really held part of their core identity.
So now part one reads as Lewiston Public Schools shall accept a student's assertion of their gender identity.
Period.
Period. End of story.
Mm. And then that second sentence, an educational institution in no case should require medical or mental health records as proof of a student's gender identity. Keeping that second
Yeah.
sentence.
Yes, keeping that. I'm tired.
And Member Hawkins, you're okay with that?
Yes.
Okay. Any further discussion? Ward 2.
Yes.
Ward 3.
Yes.
Ward 5.
Yes.
6.
Yes.
7.
Yes.
City Council.
Yes.
Yes. Ward 1.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
Motion passes. Too many. Motion passes 8-0.
Thank you. Is that all?
I was about to ask for 5 minutes so I could send this out
Okay,
and then we'll tackle the last one.
we'll take a very brief break and return in 5 minutes.
Can you guys still hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Yes.
I just wanted to point out that if an email is being sent to my school email address, I'm not going to be able to see it right now because I'm driving and I don't have Wi-Fi. And it's not on my phone, it's on my laptop. So,
Member Bowden, you can always just abstain from the next vote.
What she's emailing out is, we had added a few extra words, I think is all it was, to the policy last November, to the JICK bullying policy last November. And so the version that was sent out in the packet was the previous version, not the updated version. There aren't substantial changes, so I imagine Ms. Ray could probably explain what those changes were from last November so that you can get sort of a visual on it if you want, or you can abstain.
yeah, no, if she can just explain it real quick before we vote on it, I'd appreciate it, just because I'm not going to be able to see it. So,
Okay, perfect.
yeah, thanks.
All right, school committee is back in public session. We will resume with what was previously agenda item number 8 to receive and approve the first reading of policy JICK.
Great, thank you. So I apologize for this. So we are taking up 3 policies that are related. Policy JICK, JICK-R, and JICK-E3. These are bullying and forms related to bullying. As above, we're bringing the policy into line to exclude elementary level students from possible expulsion as a disciplinary action. I did send around the updated version. So what happened, and I apologize for the members who aren't here, I was using a Word document instead of the PDF on the website. It's not a substantive change. But we did adopt a new policy, JICK, in November of 2020. I was using the 2016 version. Similar to other policies we've passed tonight, it is adding in that exclusion of elementary students from possible expulsion. So nothing wild, but just want to make sure we dot our T's and cross our I's on policy.
Thank you. Member Majerus Collins.
I move that we adopt the policy as recommended.
Is there a second? Seconded by member Beaumont. Any further discussion? Ward 2.
Yes.
3,
Yes.
5,
Yes.
6,
Yes.
7,
Yes.
city council?
Yes.
Yes. Ward 1.
No.
Motion passes 7-1.
Thank you. And then we will return to items B and D under agenda item number 11, which is to receive and approve the second reading of ACA anti-racism and ACAB harassment and sexual harassment of school employees.
Just a quick note on these. You saw these during the June 30th meeting. They passed unanimously and had no edits to bring forward to the second reading. This will just enact these.
Thank you. Member Majerus Collins.
Move that we adopt them as presented.
Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Beaupont. Any further discussion? Ward 2.
Sorry, I was reaching for the mute. Yes.
Ward 3.
Yes.
5,
Yes.
6,
Yes.
7,
Yes.
city council?
Yes.
Yes. Ward 1.
No.
Motion passes 7-1.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming on Alicia's Policy Roadshow. I will send updated versions to the superintendent and assistant for anything that's coming through as a change, and I will send those to the committee as well.
Thank you, Ms. Ray. Agenda item number 12 is to receive and review the school committee code of conduct. If you don't mind, I'd like to just give a little reminder before we start this. As part of the code of ethics, which is policy BCA from our policy manual, item number letter C is to make no disparaging remarks in or out of school committee meetings about other members of the school committee. And I would just like to remind members while we're discussing this policy that we should also be following this policy. There is no mechanism in place to address what somebody might feel is disparaging remarks by another member. So I would recommend that people take those concerns up directly with the member they feel has wronged them. If there was a need for some sort of a way to address those kind of things, I would suggest that it be written into procedural rules as we move forward. But as for tonight, I hope we follow the code of ethics while we're discussing the code of ethics.
So I provided a copy of the code of ethics in the packet. And really in just quick review, I think that I want to preface with a lot of the work that this committee has done has been very challenging work. I've been pleased with the progress that we've been able to make, even though we've had some turnover, some changes. I do think some things have gotten maybe harder than they need to be at times. These are also conversations of passion. And I think if we can move forward with these items in consideration, just as a refresher, I think it would be of benefit to the committee's work.
Does anyone have any question? Member Potvin?
So I asked for this to be put on the agenda to have some discussion about what it means. I think one thing that's missing here, it's sort of like any law or any policy or any rule. It's only as good as the enforcement. And what's missing here in this policy is there's no enacting piece to address an action by a member that has crossed that line. Now, I'm not going to get into personal issues, but I will just generally carpet blank cover this, that, there have been things said of me that have personally affected me in my life on the outside. There have been things that have crossed the line hovering on civil rights violation issues. When a board member sits here as a person of judgment on a board that renders judgment on these very complaints of civil right issues, and one is accused of things like that, regardless of what specific it is, it sullies the moment, it sullies the member, and it creates a very difficult situation legal wise. And I think that there has to be some mechanism that that can be triggered immediately to address this. And there has to, obviously there's not a whole lot that happens as far as a penalty goes, but even to address it as in a censor situation, to be able to have consequences, to be able to draw those parameters of which people discuss. Everyone has disagreements, everybody, but it doesn't need to get to the point of accusing people of being a certain way or what a person's, how they view it. And I think there just needs to be more. For this to sit here without any enforcement why is it here? That's the way I look at it. And I think we need to be able to do that, to call it out. And I think that not just this board, but other boards I've served on, if mechanisms were in place to immediately activate and to call a member accountable, a lot more following it wouldn't probably have happened, but because we don't enforce anything, people's personal feelings pop up and end up saying things that probably are regrettable. And I'm just viewing it as a viewpoint of any member sitting on this board that there should never be an occasion for personal attacks. And really to understand that any personal attack against a board member weakens this board as a whole body moving forward in any type of litigation that we may do. So I guess I would make a recommendation to we're not voting on this, right? This is already in play. I would make a recommendation that policy takes this up to account for what does it mean to hold our people accountable? How will this happen? Is it a board, and a simple board member making an immediate inquiry, if it's supported by the majority of the board at the moment? I think there's, you can always take up this censor thing down the road, but it loses its validity as time goes on, and I think there needs to be an immediate call to it. And I, just because of, leadership being leadership, there's always going to be some sort of conflict of interest. And I think it should be open to any member being able to call it out at that moment. So I would just make that recommendation that this is, you know, it's been needless. It's been needless the times that I've had to go through this. And it's been unfounded, just more people had more questions than anything about it, you know, and it's just, it deteriorates the level of discussion a person can have when something is sown into the public's mind that, you know, because somebody's upset at somebody and says something. So that's where I'm going with it. You know, I just think that it's fine the way it's written, but we need an arm to address it. And maybe even address a little more detail that, you know, with public, with social media being what it is, you know, that's just as harmful as anybody saying something in public. And because ultimately it goes to the public. So, you know, I think this, I would just recommend that this be moved to committee for evaluation, and to strengthen it. And moving forward, I guess I would ask the chair, when things do happen, what is the expectation of action from a board member?
So I think this is something that would be taken up in procedural rules, not necessarily through the policy committee, but we can refer it to the policy committee if that's more appropriate. I think that the procedural rules are what we follow as a committee, and that's where there should be some sort of definition of what the repercussions, or however you want to look at it, is. This document as itself just explains how we're supposed to behave. I don't think that we can add to a document that says this is how you're supposed to behave, what the repercussions are for not behaving. I think, having served on this committee for 6 years and then on various superintendents and subcommittees for 4 years before the 6 years I've been on the committee, I've interacted with a lot of people. And I can say that this term that we're in right now, there has been an almost intentional presentation. It's been brought up, you've mentioned it here in public session, that there's a divide on this committee. And I think that there's been a lot of intention in creating the appearance of a divide, and then that has sort of over time boiled over. And I think that some people don't necessarily feel the repercussions of that until it affects them personally, until their feelings get hurt. As for being the chair, I think if one committee member is redirecting another committee member that they feel has done something wrong, as long as it's just pointing out something, I don't know that the chair as a person can sort of step in and mediate that in the moment. I think that if a member feels like another member spoke to them inappropriately, or they didn't like their tone or that kind of stuff, that they should probably take that up one-on-one. And if that doesn't resolve it, then potentially bring it to the superintendent or I, and then we can mediate it in that way. But I don't know that any of this is something that should be. I think that our boardsmanship and the orientation to boardsmanship that we had when we started was supposed to set the foundation that we would all kind of work together and respect each other. In all of the years that I've served for the Lewis Public Schools, I've never encountered a committee like what we've been on for the last year and a half, almost 2 years now. And I think that's part of the problem. We have some very strong personalities right now, and that creates some sort of conflict. But I don't know, short of revising the procedural rules again, which we have done probably 5 or 6 times in the last year and a half, and adding a mechanism in there, I don't know that there's another way to address it other than people just need to be cordial with each other, and people can disagree, but they don't have to be nasty. And I think that's something that several people on this committee, I think that all of us could kind of reassess the way we speak to each other sometimes. Ms. Ryan?
So I would agree with the chair that I don't think this needs to come to policy subcommittee. I think just based on my reading of this, it's very centered in I statements and taking responsibility for ourselves as individual members. In terms of repercussions for members, that would have to be prescribed actually in city charter, would be my understanding. I think maybe censure you could get away with in the procedural rules, but this policy, I do not believe is the place for that. I'll take a liberty right now and just say, like, we all signed up to be public officials, either by appointment or by election. And it can be really tough sometimes, but we've got to have slightly more Teflon skin when folks come for us. We all just got to take our licks and listen and try to do the best and make the best decisions moving forward from there. I think direct communication is always going to help when there's interpersonal issues here. But unfortunately, I do not believe this policy is the place to take action.
Thank you. Member Majoris Collins.
I'm sure that everyone on this committee has at one time or another taken issue with something that another committee member has said. Half the sentiments I've heard so far, and perhaps even go a little further, which is to say that, in the sense that Member Potvin is seeking a mechanism by which to enforce this policy, a resolution to censure a member or members for misconduct is something that doesn't have to be written into policy or procedural rules to move forward. If a member seeks that as a solution, I would say that that it would have to be an extraordinary circumstance for me to support that, and I would hope that other members would exercise similar caution in that sort of avenue. But I just don't see that. I think that the solution Member Poppin seeks is already available to him, and I would say as well that as Member Ray pointed out, that ultimately any substantive penalties for members on this committee in any fashion are only come from the city charter or from the voters in the city, and so that's part of what this is. But insofar as Member Potvin seeks the opportunity to request a motion censuring a particular member for particular misconduct, I think that option is already available to him and doesn't need to be written into anything else.
Any Member Potvin?
What is the procedure for censoring? I mean, is this something at the moment? Is this something that gets put on the agenda with a vote of the committee? Is it something you decide on
No,
your
it's
own?
something that the committee votes on. There's been a previous discussion about this a while ago, and ultimately what it came down to is, from my understanding, was that it's more of a ceremonial thing anyways. It's sort of public humiliation, but that doesn't actually accomplish anything anyways beyond public humiliation. It doesn't really have any sort of repercussion in that, other than it's just sort of calling someone out. And I would say it's not something that we would ever want to do unless there was a very, very serious violation. And I think that there's a reason why it's not used, because it would have to be a severe violation, I think, in order for it to even make its way through the process. I don't know, Ms. Ray, do you have more specifics of step by step?
So what I would just say is that censure wouldn't be something that we would have to add to the procedural rules. It's provided for in Robert's Rules of Order. I don't know a ton about it. I'm trying to hastily look right now, but I think it has to happen in the moment. But I would caution folks against that just interpersonally, because I believe that to enact such a disciplinary action when you're having a reaction just seems like a poor way to treat each other. We have to keep working together as long as we remain on this committee, and even beyond that, because some folks end up on the council or in the mayor's seat, whatever, what have you. And so I would undertake that with the utmost caution and concern that there is a measure for that in our backup rules, the Robert's Rules of Order, but it would be heavy-handed to do.
Any other discussion? Seeing none, we will move on to agenda item number 13, which is to receive an update regarding equity work. Superintendent Langless will present.
So I'm gonna share my screen. Dave, can I get permission to do that? So my intentions were to just provide an update around equity work that's been going on, because we mentioned it, actually, member Potvin asked a good question of, what are some of the things that are going on that we intend to do? And so I thought it a good opportunity to bring it back formally, or more formally. I have written some of these things out just to give us some more context, and I just want to hit some highlights of things. And members of the committee, of course, you have this, but just going through some bulleted items. And I listed them as needs, a quick status update, and then some considerations for the future. So these are not ranked in any way, shape, or form. They're just kind of updates on a piece of paper. So the need is to establish an equity resource team. That's something that began a while back. And just the status on that is this team's developed to nearly 40 people that participate in meetings that happen for the most part monthly, sometimes a little more regular than that. Membership is open, currently consists of district leadership, school leadership, teachers, students, parents, and some other stakeholders that have been in some meetings and worked with us on this effort. And what we do in those meetings, we talk about the experiences people have, concerns that they have, things that they see, trying to get a pulse on where each individual school or person's sphere of influence is landing as far as it relates to the work. And so we can inform that process and that ongoing work. I try to think of much of what I'm sharing with you as an approach that has essentially 3 or 4 different angles on it. One being top down, one being me saying repeatedly, as you've all heard me say, that I support equity work and that we're committed to it. Another being from the ground up, and the folks that are the most impacted and closest to it are having a chance to say what their concerns are, things that they feel and want to inform a process, but also an outward. That's why I said 3 or 4 directions, but an outward piece that if we're doing work that is making sense to our students, our families, our kids, we should also, as an organization committed to learning, share those outwardly. So they don't have to be bound just into a school-based process. So the equity resource team, we've had those conversations and we're looking at building structures to do just that. So we could see things down the road as things that we're doing because as a district it's ed policy, or I'm trying to lead some work, but also that ground up piece and extending that to PTOs, other community opportunities. When we go visit other spaces, what are we sharing, and being real deliberate about how we have that two-way conversation that can stimulate that growth that we're looking for. So components for the future. Again, this is that bottom-up piece. We do want to grow the amount of students in that. And I'll spill to the next piece. The need, elevating and amplifying student voice. There's numerous examples of this, including our recent conversation about dress code policy. So that was a student voice piece that was raised. I do think it's right that we do more work there, but as we look for different stories and experiences students have had, they've been sharing them more so in curriculum. They've been sharing them more so in different spaces, so that we're hearing them and we're exploring them and doing work with them. We're really proud of the work happening at the high school with the expansion, which is going well. But remember, a lot of that work was rooted in the expanding our minds, expand our future, but it was around an exercise of identity and expression and the arts. And so I think that that's really good work that's happening that we have to continue to focus on. Also look for ways to elevate student engagement. I'm kind of reaching to my experiences a bit, but I know at the high school, there's a social justice class. I know that at Next Step, they're looking for more curriculum around that piece of their own personal lives and their experiences, and whether it's justice or injustice or how they feel about it or what's the actual law. If you're living it, it's really engaging. And so to try to keep building more of those pieces into our curriculum at all levels as it grabs kids' attention and it makes them want to be engaged by it. Grow social emotional skills of all those in our organization. In my intro here on this, SEL and equity work is not separate. It is very much connected. It very much overlaps. So we've adopted and done some work with Ruler, which is a program that's come out of Yale. But it's really about how do you feel and what's going on. And at different moments of your day, if you can ask yourself how you feel, you can also start to gravitate towards what physical things am I doing when I feel that way? What anxieties? How do I behave when I'm that way? And again, trying to develop the skill set for everybody. And this is not just about kids, but to grow that skill set and developing routines so that people are having that social emotional check-in as part of our routines in schools. And really building that context of this is a good way to live, you know, to sit and have conversations and to be thinking about where you're at. So components for the future are really about continued training and establishing routines when we get back to school in full, which is again, what we're looking at for the fall. We're going to need these skills to get back into some routines and to live life the way that we're hopeful our students and adults would and grow those skills. Strong communication in the community, critical component. Just as a quick status, we're always seeking to grow our communication with the community. Over this past year, we've used Lexikey to allow for 7 languages to participate in two-way communication. Use of interpreters, language line, translation services, messaging to the community, use of new technologies like Talking Points, which is a messaging app that translates things 2 ways for people, so they can be communication directly with a teacher or school. And just other points of contact. So, you know, we're going into the community to speak at different events. We're doing Q&As publicly. A lot of these things that haven't been done so much before, that I think the pandemic pushed us to be thoughtful of. But now that we're doing these things, communication seems to be improving a great deal. We still do announcements on the webpage, Twitter, Facebook, all of those kinds of things. But we also store files on our website that are translated for our families. If they want to go look at an older message, they can get it in their native language, at least the top 7 languages. So we want to continue to grow that effort and continue to be bridging those gaps. Next need, professional learning plan. That includes the time built in to support growth. You've approved numerous things, but to pull it all together, we've now carved out time during our afternoon meetings that are scheduled annually to do district initiative related things. And it's not all equity or social emotional learning, but there's also things around curriculum and efforts being made around the SciOp program or language learning strategies, and really looking to grow across that spectrum. Shift policy where appropriate to reflect modern practices. I think you can tell from the conversation we had tonight and also others prior to tonight. There's been some significant, meaningful policy changes that this committee has taken up, and I'm committed to that work and want to continue to do so. Develop resources and build a bank of opportunities for equity work. So we've been very deliberate this summer. Aisha and I worked closely together, as well as Karen and Sue Williams has helped because I had to go in for surgery and I couldn't be there that day. But we have brought our administrative team in, and we're doing work around equity. And the thinking is that this work is as much reflective of self as anything else. Not trying to force things down people's throat. We know people in different places in their journey, and we see the value in that reflection and that work. But to continue to build those resources in a space so that administrators can then gravitate toward them to use and help grow and develop staff. So again, taking that model of that's more of the top down piece where we have the training that is built in around that. I'll fill you guys in about that. But again, components for the future, opportunities for community-based learning, and knowing that that's a dynamic process. We can pick up as much as a school department as we can deliver. So when we start crossing that bridge from community and we get outside of our 4 walls, I know I've learned a lot going to local organizations, a church, a mosque, a community center, a nutrition center. But those are the gaps that we're bridging, and it's really starting to take some effect. Grow restorative practices. I know there was support in this committee to do that work. And so here's just a quick statement of where we're at. One of the things we're finding in the equity resource team and getting feedback from people is each school is in a different place. Some schools got a grant years ago, so they did more work. Some schools had a mini grant, so they did some work. Some schools didn't get a grant at all, but their principal was for it and made that a focus. And so we're trying to level that playing field of who has what level of experience and expectation, so there's a district we're moving forward in one direction. And of course, the effort at the high school to grow the capacity there from what we've learned in the past. So that will continue to happen. Build and maintain collaborative relationships with community-based organizations. The co-creation piece has been very powerful. And I will say that I still believe that the key to getting kids back to school that didn't engage in school last year are our community partners, because they're not going to knock on my door and say, Mr. Langless, I think I want to come back to school. But they will knock on the door at Tree Street, the Root Cellar, Mears, and various others. So we need to continue to maximize those relationships. And we've done so in numerous ways, including the poverty committee work. Recruitment and retention of staff. I know that our certified professionals contract is in negotiations, but I can't help but look up mid-July and say, what else can we do to attract people to come to Lewiston, Maine? I'll still argue that it's the best place ever to work. It's the most rewarding, most fulfilling. Love our kids, love our community, but we still got to fill those spots. And so we're exploring ways that we can do that within the contract and then the rules of negotiation, but also, what else can we do? How do we incentivize things? But then how do we keep them? And one of the things that we did last year is an affinity group. This was for adults. There are some communities that are trying some affinity groups. I don't think we're there yet with kids. Maybe someday we will be, but we're not there yet. But with adults, we had educators that were people of color that were coming together monthly and meeting only with educators of color. And the stories they could tell, the experiences they could share were invaluable to them. And it gave them an opportunity to have a voice that in another setting they might not have. So we want to continue that work. The feedback I've received from the folks that were participating in those groups is really, really powerful. Because in different venues, right, wrong, or indifferent, the voice isn't the same. They didn't feel like they could express or share certain things. But when they could sit together, they built a bond, and it gave them someone around to continue to work with and be around. So committing to that effort so that we can make sure we're doing things to retain our staff. Other things that we've continued to do this year, a little different from an affinity group, but I've met with different demographics of people separately on purpose, because people will say things when it's not everyone. But if you're the person that's closest to the issue or the concern, you can get a windfall of information and wealth of knowledge from people who are living in a certain pocket of our community, who make up our larger community, but their sphere of influence is a little smaller in their subgroup. And what a powerful conversation you can have when you don't just fill a room. And so I want to continue to do that work. It's really informing our practices. So just a quick update, some things that we have going, some things we want to continue to do, and I'm happy to answer any questions anyone has or dig deeper if somebody wants to.
Any questions, comments? Mr. Ray?
Thank you, Chair Parks. I just wanted to ask about so I feel like I heard disparate things over the past year about the involvement of Bates College students and faculty with LPS. Has that been hindered by the pandemic, and are we ready to go back full force with those collaborative programs in the fall?
They were certainly hindered by the pandemic, but not for any other cause. Bates has been a wonderful partner and continues to be. Actually did some great work this year, especially in the middle school and some connections to the high school and actually even elementary schools. The hard thing is we were limiting guests and they were limiting some interactions. So it had some gaps, but we did what we could electronically. But I also think that Bates has done a good job building some electronic supports for teaching and learning. So they're building a bank there that we're using and sharing with them. And I really think that this year we'll be able to jump back into I would say cleaner working relationship. Not that there were any problems other than the pandemic, but Bates seems to be standing at the ready to help.
Any other discussion? All right, thank you. Agenda item number 14, report from the city council representative.
Thank you, Chair Parks. The council meets tomorrow for our only July meeting. We will have a workshop in which we'll be discussing a sewer connection with Sabatis. Exciting. Some more relevant points of interest for the school committee. The new Lewiston Youth Advisory Council will be introduced at tomorrow night's meeting. They do some really great work with the city, and many of them are LPS students. So that's exciting. We will be taking up the second read of an affidavit of residency. Counselor Clement has introduced this additional affidavit of residency where folks will have to swear under perjury of law that they live where they say they live before they run for office. So that's going through second read. We're also talking about the appropriation of American Rescue Plan funds. The city is in receipt of additional funding and we will be appropriating that tomorrow, as well as more information and some amendments to our public art plan, and then approving some public art pieces tomorrow night as well.
Thank you. Agenda item number 15, report from school committee chair. I don't have an update to provide. I guess I continue to sit on the poverty committee here in Lewiston, as well as the public health committee, and work is continuing on both of those fronts, but I don't think there's anything really imminent right now that directly impacts the school department. So that's all I've got. And agenda item number 16, report from the superintendent.
I feel like I've said a lot tonight, but just a couple of quick things to make sure everyone is aware. One is in our work with the community and the poverty committee, they need a fiscal agent. I do think that we have the resources to be that. So as they pursue grants, again, those funds are intended to directly support the effort toward graduation with specific targets at the lower level to help with literacy and students reading. And also various other supports around having access to medical resources and the things that they need for, health and wellness as well as education. So the mayor reached out to me about that and told him I'd bring it to you. I didn't think there'd be any objections, but I wanted to make sure that was said so everyone was aware. We continue. We got kicked down the road a little bit. Aisha Hall was away, but she's taken the lead for the equity statement for Lewiston Public Schools. I know that we reviewed one here recently in conversation. She's going to revisit that when she's back with some community stakeholders, and then that should go full circle and we'll have it back in front of you. And just as a reminder that the meeting scheduled for the 26th is scheduled to be a personnel only meeting, so it should be pretty quick. But I may be bringing in a quick title presentation. And we did this last year because we get into that window of it needs to be done by the end of July, but it takes the summer to do it. And so Ms. Darrigan may join us if that is a timely thing on that evening. But again, pretty quick. So,
Thank you. Agenda item number 17, school committee community announcements. Does anyone have? Yes, go ahead.
So we're not doing policy on the 26th then.
I mean, I think that we might be able to do some things. I will say that if it's work like a continuation of tonight and it's landing heavily on work that you've done, I can support that. I'm sure Chair Parks would also. What I'm struggling right now is there's a lot of people taking vacation. So if we ask for something bigger to come back together, it's pretty scattered in July.
I will offer my services as a consultant in August. How about that?
Thank you. Were there any community announcements, Ms. Hawkins?
Just wanted to say really quickly that I was informed today that the new dock down at Railroad Park was put in. So there will be events coming up over the summer where you can borrow a boat and actually go and paddle on the river. Just a note that the dock is only accessible if you have a life preserver on. So if you're going to go and check it out, admire from the shore or bring your life preserver.
Is it a good place to launch a kayak from?
Oh, yes.
Thank you. Any other Ms. Ray, go ahead, please.
Sorry, I had two notes and I totally overlooked them. So starting on Wednesday, July 14th, the Bates Dance Festival is back in town. Very important cultural addition to our city, as well as on July 24th, the first Lewiston Rowing Regatta will be taking place. I don't have a ton of details, but our good friend Amy Smith is organizing that. So another it's just so nice to see things coming back to life in this city. So definitely check those out.
Thank you. Yes.
Just a note that finally, the city appears to be making progress on the old Hudson bus site. They're doing some work down there and that's supposed to become, I believe, a soccer field. But that's been sitting fallow for 2 years at least, and finally something's happening. So that's encouraging.
Definitely, yes. Thank you. Agenda item number 18, future agenda items. Member Bopalan. Mike.
Sorry, too technical. I was unfortunately doing a little side work of research when we did agenda item 12. There are a couple things I'd like to say about that. If I can't say them now, I would like it on a future agenda item for our next meeting. Thank you. We can save
Would you
ourselves
prefer
some
to speak
time.
now, or would member, or is anyone opposed to that?
Sorry.
I would just say there was a member of the public who left in the interim of that, so they may have wanted to hear our comments on that, just my only thought.
So is your request that we revisit the code of conduct in the future?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Any other future agenda items? Agenda item number 19, to enter into executive session to discuss a personal matter in accordance with MRSA 4016A. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second,
Thank you. Ward 2,
Yes.
3,
Yes.
5,
Yes.
6,
No.
7.
Yes.
City Council?
Yes.
Yes. Ward 1?
yes.
Thank you. School committee will go into